Marvel Snap's newest card, Maverick, is a deck builder's dream. There is so much to do with this card. Let's talk about 6-7 decks. We'll see how many we end up actually covering. First things first, Maverick is a 3/3 with an activate that gives the next card you play power equal to Maverick's power. This card has a couple of major best friends. Best friend number one is anything that's going to be able to buff its power. This is a bunch of cards, but I think the one you're going to see across decks most consistently is going to be Agony. Agony is a phenomenal best friend to this card. The next thing Maverick is going to look for is some way to get its output multiplicative, whether that be as simple as using it on a Brood to get multiplied output out of this card, or as complex as using it on a Dakin that you then Frigga. That kind of stuff is pretty key to how this card functions as well. It is both an investment you make and an investment you need to reap the benefits of. So ideally, the investment you make, you're doing it fairly linearly. I'm adding some power to this card. There's no real way to do multiplicative things unless you really fudge the math and say, well, Agony, that's technically 3. I'm not adding 3. I'm multiplying the power here of this Maverick. Really, what Maverick is a bridge. It is a bridge from cards that are already pretty good to cards that they specifically don't work with. You can't Agony a Brood. Now you can. That's what Maverick is bringing to the table. The other thing Maverick brings to the table is a genuinely colossal amount of random BS combo decks at high infinite. This is not a card that I think when I looked at, I was expecting to be combo deck BS linchpin. But a lot of the decks we're going to talk about today are from very high level players being played in very high level ranks, and they look like very absolute piles. And that is because this card is actually weirdly good at allowing you to do extremely garbagey surprise Galactus gameplay. That is, it seems, an actual part of this card's range. So a lot of what this card does is very boring stat output decks, some Silver Surfer type stuff. And then the other thing this card does is really, really weird BS. And I haven't really been able to gauge with any kind of realistic understanding which of these things are the things that's going to stick around about the card. I have a good guess, and it is that I think the stats stuff, especially Agony, is notably powerful. There are 2 decks on here that I think I'm very confident you're gonna be seeing as like the kind of thing that this is metagame playable. The interesting thing about calling something metagame playable, though, is that it is still context dependent. It's not like, oh my god, this is absolutely always going to be the nuttiest thing ever. I think people on this channel will remember how I felt about the V-Hand Headpool deck, which I think is a metagame playable deck. The question is just if it's going to be the best thing in its niche, and for that deck, the answer was pretty clearly no. For Maverick decks, the answer might genuinely be yes, because her best friends aren't just things that multiply, or his best friends, I should say, aren't just things that multiply his power and things that multiply his output. There's also a Jocasta thing going on here that is pretty damn sweet. Getting additional Maverick procs for very ridiculous things is a very powerful thing to do. Having the ability to get boom, 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 boom all up into one unit enables even more of the very stupid combo side of this card. In other words, this card is a card that has been doing a bunch of stuff that we've honestly never seen before. I think one way to interpret this is, wow, look at all these terrible decks people that I know at high infinite are winning with. This is absolute garbage and they're farming. Maverick must be busted. I think it's hard to separate the value of a lot of surprise power from the power level of a card. Surprise power at high infinite is kind of always going to be really strong. So I don't want people to watch this video and be like, oh my god, it's making Galactus and Zombie Galacti, spoiler, actually kind of playable. This card must be the most messed up thing on earth, because I don't know that it fundamentally changes a lot about those decks. I think that it is the kind of thing that adds power to them, but those are not the ones that I'm necessarily confident are going to stick around. What I will say is I'm slowly becoming convinced that losing to random Maverick Galactus stuff is just going to happen to you. Like, it's just one of those things that they added to the game that's like, oh, yep, that exists now. Like, you're just going to have to incorporate that into your worldview and not be mad when it happens to you. We're going to start with Iris's Maverick combo list, which many viewers of this channel will likely be familiar with the shape of. This is a combo list that is originally built around the things that you are able to do with Dakin and Bullseye in a Surfer shell. What this list is aiming to do is be the most point outputty of these kind of decks. It's actually not so secretly just a combo deck that looks like it's in a mid-range deck package. The point output here is absolutely bonkers, and in a world where a lot of people are playing Maverick decks, having a Maverick deck that has a thing that can scale this high is really powerful. This is a deck that is using both the input and the output of Maverick fairly well. For the input of Maverick, of course, there is an Agony. That is the absolute GOAT. Surge is also secretly a Maverick input card in that it just lets the card get an additional free power, and that's a really cool thing to do. The output side is covered by a couple of cards here. There is, of course, Brood. There is, of course, Dakin. And Frigga, actually, combined with Moon Girl, can sometimes allow you to have some really stupid Maverick things going on. It's not the most consistent thing you've ever done, probably, but you can get some really stupid buffed cards into your hand and do really stupid buffed cards things with them. That's a really cool thing to do. Most games, it probably won't happen, but you do have that in your back pocket. What this deck does is do its best to output as much stuff with the Maverick as you can and get as much out of one Maverick proc as possible. Whether that be a Dakin that you end up copying, a Brood that you end up copying, you see what I'm getting at here. The point is to set up a combo style output that is in a deck that I think a lot of people probably don't expect combo style output from. The downside is that you add a little bit of uncertainty and you aren't actually getting Jocasta in here, where a lot of the other decks that we're going to see are using Jocasta as a way to have another input addition to this card, Maverick. I think this is a really solid build that especially is pretty good right now because it has so much snap equity against the more boring Maverick builds. That concept is, I think, pretty interesting. The idea of snap equity against the more boring Maverick builds is a real thing in the early games here, and the early days of a card's release, and I think there is something to it accounting for a reasonable amount of some of the weirdness that you're going to see here, because there's definitely just like some decks that are just like built fully for maximum output with this card, and they are pretty good into the like what's probably going to actually survive. It's there's Maverick combo and then there's like Maverick midrange, and generally combo will beat midrange. Like that's a real dynamic that happens when it does what it needs to do, which means it has sort of the built-in control over snaps a lot of the time. Anyway, long story short, this is kind of what mid-range Surfer Maverick looks like. It's just going to look like this. Like, this is just all of the cards that are good with Maverick, and then all of the cards that are good with those cards. Oh, look at that. What are we doing? We got Spider-Man Noir in his newly buffed form in here. He's super sick. We've got a bunch of really cool cards that are doing really strong stuff. This is just a great points output Juggernaut and Cosmo thing. I've made no bones about how stuck I am on Juggernaut, Cosmo, Superior Spider-Man as a sort of deck building core here. We talked about it in the context of the Iris list from the tier list last week, or this week. I don't know. Do you guys think the weekend starts on Sundays or the week starts on Sundays? I suppose that's kind of a religious question. Anyway, we talked about it in there. We talked about it in the ongoing deck. And what's kept Surfer out of those conversations is power level. Like, that's really just it, right? Like where the ongoing deck and the Surfer deck, they sort of look at each other and they say, okay, well, I'm you, except I'm the ongoing deck and I have ways to go multiplicative, and you're the Surfer deck and you don't. But you do now. This is the super boring, super boring surfer list, but it is probably just gonna be around. Like, this is just like, if you ask me to pick one deck that this card is definitely a part of and is probably pretty good, well, it remains to be seen whether it will consistently reach the levels of output that put it among those other cards on the tier list. But there's a real chance it's the best of the Juggernaut's Cosmo decks. Like, that's a real thing that is possible about this list. And I think that that's a really interesting, really solid thing. Again, of course, you're seeing the Agony. Agony is showing up so much with this card that I kind of think that it's starting to get a little bit questionable. Like, this card is, I won't say it's massively dependent on the Agony, but it cares a lot about that card. Like, that is just really, really powerful input adjustment that we have no other real access to. It's not really a thing we have. And so this ends up being a deck that has a ton of output, Cosmo Juggernaut, classic winning proposition, really strong stuff, and it is up there with the other Cosmo Juggernaut decks for sure in terms of output. It can really do some damage. Is it better than Ongoing? I think is the real question for this, because I have a lot of faith in Ongoing. I'm a big Ongoing Jug Cosmo Superior Spider-Man guy. I really enjoy that list. I can't be sure that this is better in terms of having this sort of multiplicative output, but it does feel very similar. It's been so long since I could say Big Baby is top 15 in the world with the worst deck you've ever seen, but let's get into some of the absolute garbage Maverick is doing. This is either going to be the future of Maverick or just some weird stuff Big Baby played one time. I think one of the things that this deck is correctly identifying is if everyone's doing Maverick stuff, I would like my Maverick stuff to be bigger than their Maverick stuff. I would also like some free wins involved in my Maverick stuff. We're going to come back to that concept for another deck later, because if you can believe this, this is maybe the fourth weirdest deck on this list, because that is just the kind of card Maverick is. Yeah, there's the boring stuff, but there's the exciting stuff too. What this deck is trying to do is set up some form of BS Infinite. One of the most interesting things this deck can do, and I use interesting here, interesting. If you are able to set up a Jocasta Prodigy Maverick and then use all of that on a Galactus, it is a quite good thing to do. You can do that. It's pretty sick. You can actually also do that on a final turn Scarlet Spider in the same lane. That's pretty sick too. What this deck is trying to do is just nut off in ways people won't really understand what's going on about. The whole point here is there's a bunch of dumb stuff with this card that people aren't really doing, and Jocasta Prodigy, that's a pretty dumb thing to do with it. The idea generally is just, I would like to have a combo you have not seen that is doing something very, very stupid that you won't really know what it is. Does my combo lose to Deafening Chord and Cosmic Ghost Rider? Yeah, sure. But are you playing those considering Maverick just came out? Probably not. And that's really interesting. This is a deck that is a Maverick deck that is farming other Maverick decks. And I think this represents the weirdness angle of it. And I think, realistically, this kind of thing is a good lesson to keep in mind for any Activate that comes out. Is hey man, Jocasta Prodigy, that still exists. And you still need to put some respect on that name. That's just real. You are still going multiplicative on a Jocasta Prodigy. That's a really strong-ass thing to do. Here is the even stupider iteration of this deck. Yes, it's Cerebro 3 Galactus, but again, it's leaning on a lot of the same things here. There's the Jocasta thing going on here. There's things being leaned on here that are very straightforward. This is, I think, fairly obviously kind of a gimmick, right? Come on now. Thing to keep in mind is it seems like what happens with Prodigy is he gives his power at the time of activation. So just make sure that you remember that when you're playing a deck that does things as weirdly as this. Basically, this is just Cerebro 3, except sometimes you have a Jocasta Prodigy My Galactus line. That's just kind of what's going on here. It's the classic sort of Jay Walla. I don't really know which one of them came up with this. It's either Jay Walla or Butt. I named it Butt, but Jay Walla's probably going to get mad at me, and it probably is Jay Walla because it's a freaking Cerebro deck. I'm remembering now. It definitely is Jay Walla, but he'll get mad in the comments below. It's fine. That's free engagement for me. This is the sort of example of what I mean about day one Maverick stuff, where if you look at this and you take them at their word that this is like amazing and seriously good and like they're farming with it, and you try to take that as meaningful, it's like, you know, I'd like to believe that, because what that would indicate to me is this card is really messed up. But I worry that what it's actually indicating is it's a card that allows for a lot of turn 6 output in confusing and unpredictable ways, which is the kind of thing that a really good player really loves, but is definitely not the kind of thing that trickles down. One of the things that really sticks out to me about Maverick as a card is I don't think it's simple. I think this card is a headache. This is a hard card to do the right things with. It is prescriptive. It is like, I guess you'd argue that makes it easier, but there's a bunch of like little weird individual like gimmicky interactions that you have to care about with this card. It's just weird. And I think that this kind of stuff, it's a card that has a lot of inherently built up value at the top end of gameplay, because players at the top end of gameplay love two things. One, free cubes off some surprise BS. That's free cubes. That's really good. Everyone's expecting the normal stuff. You need to get your free cubes. This is a deck that has more surprise BS in it than basically anything else I've ever seen. The other thing that people love is generally having a lot of output on the final turn of the game, because having a lot of output on the final turn of the game makes it harder for your opponent to play the final turn of the game. And so both the last deck and this deck are sort of built on that principle. And that makes it a little bit difficult to tell if they're like serious metagame players or if they're just really good players farming with really weird offbeat decks. And I think largely my guess would be that no, Maverick probably does not make this kind of thing meta. I actually think the activate stuff is a little bit closer, but it has some pretty clear counters that likely keep it in tier 2-ish, despite what I would describe as some pretty massive output, honestly, from the previous list. This feels a little bit more surprising. I think that's kind of the big thing I wanted to get across here, is Maverick is somehow this super boring high-level mid-range card, and also a card that is allowing you to do some of the weirdest stuff you've ever seen in a Marvel Snap deck. Let's get another boring one in here. This is Derek's build of Frankie Raye. And Frankie Raye, I mean, this is just kind of what the Frankie Raye deck looks like. Like, oh, look, it's the Frankie Raye deck with Maverick in here. A couple interesting choices. Using Kate over Merlin, kind of an interesting direction for this to go. No Gwenpool, kind of an interesting direction for this to go. If you have a Mr. Fantastic First Steps lying around your collection and you haven't used him in 6 months, this might be the deck to look for. This deck appeals to me on such a visceral level, and like, you know, yeah, it's just the mid-range deck and the only interaction is Juggernaut. Like, yeah, I get it. But it does do points in a really compelling way. Maverick is a really powerful addition to this point package. It's just a generally strong and good deck that is able to output points. Again, talk a lot about high-level Marvel Snap. All of your points are in hand on turn 6. They're all very confusing. They're hard for people to see. You Maverick your Frankie Raye. Your Frankie Raye is 6 power. It goes to 12 power. You Agony your Maverick. Oh, okay. Your Frankie Raye is 9 power. It goes to 18 power. You're also playing this other stuff. It's pretty straightforward. Like, the numbers are really big, and then there's also a Juggernaut in it. And like, that's kind of just what the deck is. If I had to guess, I would say that comparing this to the Juggernaut, Cosmo, Superior Spider-Man sort of nexus of mid-range decks, this one has a lot more in-hand power on the final turn of the game, and a lot less, like, genuine multiplicativity compared to the Surfer or to the ongoing version in that space. I think that's notable. I don't think it's necessarily like 100%, but like, I think it's like something to pay attention to that puts this deck maybe a half step behind those lists, if I had to guess. But I do think that what this deck is doing is just very, very fine. What Maverick is doing in it is just very, very fine. And generally speaking, this is a strong enough deck for you to play. Now, you're not going to believe this, but there's another G-Man surprise deck, and the split on this is just really funny to me because it's like 3, not boring, but like relatively more straightforward mid-range decks with Maverick, and then 3, just whatever the weirdest Galactus/Galacti end game that you've ever seen in Marvel Snap decks. And I think that it's only right to end on Zombie Galacti. Jay Wallace sent this to me. He's like, this is literally farming. I don't know how to interpret that because that could mean anything, I think. But I do think that it is very clear to me that Maverick is an upgrade to this card. And it is also very clear to me that if this card is ever good, it's really, really, really annoying. And I definitely buy that on day 1 of Maverick, that you doing this sort of really dumb upgrade kind of thing with your Zombie Galacti and getting this awful Shuri thing out of the deck and getting the Jocasta Prodigy thing into the deck, like, that's a big upgrade. I really do want to stress that. Like, that is a really big upgrade. I almost wonder if the other Jocasta Prodigy versions of this thing should also be Magic decks. Like it's like that's the kind of thing that really sticks out is like how much you get out of that extra turn. Like, yeah, you're a Magic deck, right? But again, we talk about what day 1 metagames for a card like this look like. They don't look like a lot of Merlin. They don't look like a lot of Legion. They don't look like a lot of Cosmic Ghost Rider. They do look like a lot of Maverick mirrors. And if you're going to be playing a lot of Maverick mirrors, one of the things you got to keep in mind is sometimes your opponent's Maverick deck is just going to be fundamentally capable of more numbers than your Maverick deck. And this is what this deck is trying to do here. And I know it sounds weird to say that about Zombie Galacti, but the thing I really want to point out about Maverick is I think a lot of people started sleeping on Jocasta when they punched her best friend of Invisible Woman First Steps in the face and really made her not have nearly such good output. And I think that there are also other good actual reasons here. Cosmic Ghost Rider is a big part of the meta. Deafening Chord is a big part of the meta. These are things that are definitely still good against this kind of stuff. I don't want to act like this kind of stuff is like, wow, it's OP, it's busted, holy crap, look at these numbers, and not talk about like, yeah, you know, this is the kind of thing that the metagame has very real ways of solving. But I do think when a new card comes out that has this much raw power, it is worth talking about just how much that raw power makes even really bad decks feel much better. And I think that's the best way that I can have to describe Maverick. Maverick is raw power. This card is great output. Whether you're playing it maximally with Prodigy's Jocasta stuff or relatively minimally in fair Surfer lists, you're still probably getting a lot out of this guy because of the either input multiplication with Agony, multiplication, it's addition, or output multiplication with cards like Brood or Dakin, or if you're doing really stupid stuff, Galactus and Zombie Galacti. This is a card that has a lot going for it in terms of, wow, look at all of this cool stuff. There's a lot of raw power here. There's a lot of screenshot ability here. This is also a card that has to sit on the board to do its really maximal stuff. And that's a little bit more awkward. Deafening Chord midrange, Cosmic Ghost Rider midrange. I mean, we are kind of in a metagame where V-Hand is the Deafening Chord midrange deck, and Ramp can very easily be the Cosmic Ghost Rider deck in a little bit. You are going to output those decks if they don't stop you. That's built in. But you do have some sort of vulnerability, especially the more you invest in being a Jocasta version of this, to just your whole combo immediately eating it. That's non-zero. But we're not there yet. And since we aren't there yet, the maximalist combo versions of the Maverick decks, to me, seem like a better choice than the more minimalist mid-range ones. That won't be true once people start adapting to them. But if you're playing a lot of Maverick mirrors, my fundamental advice to you is just find something really stupid to do instead of nickel and diming it. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I've been KMBest. You've been phenomenal. And I'm very annoyed by this realization. But I realized that after putting a call to action for asking people to subscribe at the beginning of my video, it actually worked. I am ashamed by that because I don't want to be that guy. But I mean, it worked, so I'm going to be that guy. So expect those in the future. I'll be trying to integrate them. The call to action subscribes at the beginning of my videos. Didn't do it this time because I'm stupid. Thanks so much for watching. I've been KMBest. Remember to like and subscribe. End of the video. And, of course, I will see you in the next one.